Thomas Reed was not a perfect man, but he was a good one. At 67, his back ached when it rained, and he could no longer read without squinting. But for most of his life, he'd built things, real things. Bridges, heating systems, emergency scaffolds, hospitals. He'd spent 40 years as a mechanical engineer. Never rich, but respected. Honest. The kind of man who fixed his neighbor's fence without being asked. He lost his wife, Linda, 2 years ago to a short and brutal battle with ovarian cancer. After that, the world became still. Too still. Their home in Oak Hill had always been modest but warm. Photos on the wall, a swing on the back porch, a backyard they never managed to fully tame. After Linda passed, the silence in that house became unbearable. Every sound echoed. Every cupboard creaked a little louder. Every night felt colder. And so when his only son, Derek, made the suggestion, "Dad, why don't you come live with us?" It felt like a blessing. A new chapter. Derek had just gotten a promotion, and he and his wife Melanie were planning to buy a new, bigger house. "We'll need the help with the kids anyway," Derek had said. "Bella misses you like crazy." Tom hesitated, but not for long. The thought of being around family again, of hearing laughter in the halls, it overpowered the weight of his loneliness. Then came the bigger request. "If we had a little more down payment," Derek mentioned one afternoon over coffee, "we could actually get a place with a yard. One with space for you to have a room on the first floor, no stairs." Just saying. Tom didn't need to be pushed. Within a month, he had listed his house for sale. The price came back higher than expected, $285,000. He didn't ask for a written agreement. He didn't ask for anything. He simply handed the money over to his son. The new house was beautiful. Too big, perhaps, but full of light. 5 bedrooms, a finished basement, granite countertops. A neighborhood where people actually waved when they passed. Tom's room was small but cozy, just off the main hallway. Close enough to hear his grandchildren, Jake and Bella, running around before school. That first month felt like a second life. He read bedtime stories. Took the kids to the park. Repaired the loose tiles in the upstairs bathroom and tightened the bolts on the staircase railing. Melanie thanked him, even smiled. Derek. He was busy, but grateful, or so it seemed. "You've really made this possible, Dad," he said one night while they stood in the driveway. "Seriously?" Tom only nodded. That night, he wrote in his old, leather-bound notebook, "I think I've finally found home again." It didn't last. By the second month, things changed. Slightly at first, almost imperceptibly. Melanie stopped setting a plate for him at dinner. When Tom asked why, she answered, "Oh, I thought you'd already eaten." Jake was told not to bother Grandpa if he was in his room. Bella stopped getting bedtime stories. Derek started staying late at work, even on weekends. Then came the new rules. No TV after 9 p.m. No cooking while Melanie was preparing meals. No guests, especially his old friends. "Nothing personal," Melanie said. "It's just, we have routines." Tom didn't argue. He adjusted. He always adjusted. He went out more often, visited the park, spent quiet afternoons at the library. But when he returned, the house always felt colder. One evening, he overheard something. The kids were asleep. He was walking down the hallway when he heard Melanie's voice from the living room. Low, sharp, tired. "It's like having a stranger live here. I feel like I can't even relax in my own house." Then Derek, in that passive tone Tom had come to know too well. "He's trying. He just doesn't get it. He's a burden, Derek." Tom stood in the hallway, completely still. Not angry. Not even hurt. Just tired. That night, he looked at himself in the mirror. Same face. Same thinning gray hair. Same hands that once carried Derek on his shoulders after baseball practice. That boy was now a man, with children of his own, and yet he couldn't spare an ounce of kindness for the man who raised him. Still, Tom said nothing. The next morning, Melanie asked him not to use the upstairs bathroom anymore. It wakes the kids. He nodded and returned to his room. Sat on the bed. Opened his notebook. Wrote one line. I don't think they want me here. 1 week later, Derek called him out onto the porch. It was just after dinner. The sunset was soft. Pink light touched the rooftops. Dad, Derek started, rubbing his palms together. I've been thinking. Melanie and we just think maybe it's time you consider something more permanent. Like a senior living community or a retirement place. Tom blinked slowly. You're asking me to move out. Derek looked down. It's not like that. We're just trying to do what's best for everyone. For you too. It's not fair for you to feel uncomfortable here. I gave you everything I had, Tom said. We never asked for that. You didn't say no, either. Silence. Tom stood. I'll be gone in the morning. He didn't pack that night. He simply sat in the dark, notebook on his lap, as Bella's laughter echoed faintly from the other room, unaware of the silence that was about to fall. The next morning was quiet. The sky was gray. Tom came into the kitchen to find Melanie already bustling around, packing school lunches. Derek was sipping coffee at the counter. Tom reached for a cup. Don't bother, Melanie said. You'll just make a mess. Derek cleared his throat. You've got your tour at Sunny Meadows today, right? I canceled it, Tom said. You what? I canceled it. I'm not going to a retirement home. Melanie slammed the fridge shut. Derek's voice rose. Jesus, Dad. Just go. Go away, old man. There it was. The sentence that would stay with Tom forever. 4 words, as sharp as a blade. He didn't answer. He walked upstairs, packed 2 bags, took his notebook, and left. No goodbye. No guilt trip. No begging. He walked into the gray morning with a straight back and a quiet mind. They thought they threw me out. He wrote later that night. But they forgot something important. I never gave them the keys. Thomas Reed moved into Derek's house with hope in his heart and memories of better times. He thought this was a new beginning, a chance to be close to his family, to share laughter and warmth once again. But life had other plans. At first, the days passed peacefully. The children, Jake and Bella, filled the halls with energy and noise. They wanted Grandpa to tell them stories, play catch, and teach them old songs. Thomas cherished those moments more than anything. He even took pride in small repairs around the house, tightening loose door hinges, fixing creaky floorboards, tasks that reminded him of his engineering days. Melanie, Derek's wife, greeted him with polite smiles. She set a place for him at dinner, asked if he needed anything, and occasionally complimented the meals he made. But as weeks passed, subtle changes began to unsettle Thomas. One evening, as Thomas settled to watch the news, Melanie walked into the living room, her arms crossed. The TV's supposed to be off by 9 p.m. now, she said flatly. Kids have school tomorrow. Thomas blinked. I didn't know there was a rule. It's not a rule, it's a routine, Melanie replied, her tone sharper than before. You just need to follow it. He nodded, trying not to let the sting show. The days turned into weeks, and more house rules emerged. Thomas wasn't allowed to adjust the thermostat, it was set for the kids' comfort. He was discouraged from cooking when Melanie was preparing meals because it's easier that way. Friends who used to call him were politely told he was busy or resting. Invitations to social events stopped coming altogether. One afternoon, Thomas was in the kitchen fixing a leaky faucet when he overheard Melanie on the phone. It's like having a stranger here, she said, her voice low but cutting. I don't want to be rude, but he just doesn't fit. Derek's voice was quieter, but Thomas caught his words clearly. He's a burden, Mel. We need to think about the kids. Thomas's hands froze on the wrench. The faucet dripped steadily. Later that night, Thomas sat alone in his room. He opened his old leather notebook and wrote. I gave them everything. Now I'm a stranger in my own son's house. The next morning, Melanie told him not to use the upstairs bathroom because the kids are light sleepers. Thomas swallowed his pride. Okay, he said quietly. It was the first time he felt truly invisible. Days passed in a growing silence that pressed down on Thomas like a heavy fog. The warmth he had once felt with his family seemed to be slipping through his fingers, replaced by cold looks and whispered complaints. The house no longer felt like a refuge, but a cage. One evening, Thomas came down the stairs just as Derek and Melanie were finishing dinner in the dining room. The conversation abruptly stopped when they noticed him. I was thinking of making some tea, Thomas said hesitantly. Melanie raised an eyebrow. Oh, you know we've been eating earlier these days. The kids have school tomorrow. Thomas nodded, holding his cup of tea quietly in the living room. He sipped slowly, feeling more like a guest than a family member. After dinner, as he sat watching the television in the corner, he overheard a conversation that cut deeper than any words before. I don't think he even realizes how much we're doing for him, Melanie said sharply to Derek. Derek sighed, rubbing his face. I know, but he's not making this easy. He doesn't understand the way things work anymore. Melanie laughed, but there was no humor in her voice. He's a burden, Derek, she whispered. Thomas felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The word burden echoed through the room like a cruel refrain. He didn't confront them. Instead, he retired early to his room, his mind racing with memories of better days, when Derek was a boy and his laughter filled the house. The days that followed were filled with small cuts, each one sharpening the wound. Melanie complained about the mess he left in the kitchen. Derek brushed off his questions with impatience. The children, sensing the tension, became distant. One morning, Thomas found a note on his bedroom door. Please respect our space. This is our home. The words stung. He wanted to scream, to ask why the family that once loved him now wished him away like a stranger. But he remained silent. One afternoon, as he was reading in the garden, Jake came up to him shyly. Grandpa, the boy said softly, why don't you stay for dinner anymore? Thomas looked into Jake's innocent eyes and forced a small smile. I think your mommy and daddy are very busy, he said gently. Jake frowned. But your family. Families eat together. Thomas's throat tightened. He nodded. Yes, they do. That night, Thomas wrote in his notebook, I'm losing them, piece by piece. Then came the breaking point. It was a rainy Saturday morning. Thomas was folding laundry in the guest room when he heard footsteps approaching. Derek stood in the doorway, face tense. We need to talk, Derek said, his voice tight. Thomas set down the clothes and followed him to the porch. Outside, the rain pattered softly against the roof. Dad, Derek began, avoiding eye contact. Melanie and we think it's best for everyone if you find somewhere else to live. Thomas's heart sank. Somewhere else? He asked quietly. Yeah, Derek said quickly. A senior community, a place with people your age. It's better for you. For all of us. Thomas looked at the rain falling on the porch steps, then back at his son. I gave you everything I had, he said slowly. Derek shrugged. We never asked for it. Thomas swallowed the lump in his throat. I'll leave, he said. That night, Thomas didn't pack. He sat alone in the dark, the rain tapping against the window, thinking about the house he had sold, the dreams he had given away, and the family that no longer wanted him. He opened his leather-bound notebook and wrote, They don't see me anymore. I'm just a ghost in their house. The next morning, Thomas packed a small bag. He took his notebook and his worn coat. Without a word, he walked out the door. The rain had stopped. The world was gray but still. His heart was heavy, but his step was steady. He had nowhere to go, but he was determined to find out who he really was without them. The morning light was pale and cold as Thomas Reed stood in the kitchen of the house that was no longer his home. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, but it felt emptier than ever. He had spent the night tossing and turning, wrestling with a storm of thoughts, memories of a past filled with laughter and love, and the bitter present where he was nothing more than a stranger. As Thomas took a slow sip of his coffee, the kitchen door opened, and Derek stepped inside. His face was tense, his eyes avoiding Thomas's gaze. Melanie was behind him, clutching Bella's hand tightly, her expression unreadable. Without a word, Derek leaned over and took his coffee cup from the counter. "You ready to head out today?" he asked quietly. Thomas blinked, setting down his cup. "Head out? What do you mean?" Derek swallowed, his voice rising slightly. "You know, the appointment for that retirement community. Sunny Meadows. I made the arrangements." The words hit Thomas like a slap. "I cancelled that," he said, his voice steady but quiet. Melanie's lips pressed into a thin line. Derek's jaw clenched. "You what?" "I'm not going to a retirement home," Thomas repeated. "Not today, not ever." Derek slammed his palm on the counter, making the dishes rattle. "Jesus, Dad. Just go. Go away, old man." The phrase hung heavy in the air. It was a verdict, a command, a wound. Thomas didn't respond. He watched as Bella peeked around Melanie, eyes wide and confused. Jake stood frozen at the table, unsure how to react. Thomas took a deep breath, steadied himself, and without a word, turned toward the stairs. He climbed slowly, each step echoing in the empty hallway. When he reached his room, he packed 2 small bags with the few belongings he had: clothes, his leather notebook, a photo of Linda. His hands trembled slightly as he zipped the bags closed. He paused, staring at the door one last time. No anger. No tears. Only a quiet determination. He walked down the stairs, grabbed his coat, and stepped outside into the gray morning. The cold air hit his face like a shock. The world felt vast and indifferent. He didn't look back. Outside, Thomas wandered the streets he had known all his life. Each step was a mix of grief and clarity. He was alone, but not broken. Hours passed as he sat on a bench by the river, watching the water rush by endlessly. The current was unstoppable, relentless, a reminder that life moved forward, no matter the pain. He opened his notebook and wrote, "They think they threw me out, but they forgot something important. I never gave them the keys." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows. Thomas stayed there until the sky darkened, his mind racing with plans for justice, for dignity, for a reckoning. His journey was only beginning. Thomas Reed had nowhere to go. The night after he left his son's house, he found himself wandering the quiet streets of Oak Hill, memories swirling in his mind like the autumn leaves caught in the wind. The home he had sold, the money he had given away, the family that had rejected him, it all felt like a distant dream. He thought of his oldest friend, George McClellan. A gruff, no-nonsense man who had been by Thomas's side for over 40 years. George's small trailer at the edge of town was a refuge, simple, unpretentious, but warm. Without hesitation, Thomas knocked on the door. When George opened it, his face softened at the sight of his old friend. "Tommy," George said, pulling him inside with a firm grip. "You look like hell. What happened?" Thomas settled into the worn armchair, taking a deep breath. "I lost everything," he said simply. George frowned. "Tell me." And Thomas did. He told George everything. The house sale, the cold shoulders, the final words that cut deepest of all. "Go away, old man." George shook his head slowly. "That boy doesn't know what he's done." Thomas nodded, his eyes tired. "I gave him my house. All my savings. And now I'm nothing." George leaned forward. "You're not nothing, Tommy. Not by a long shot." Thomas pulled a folder from his bag and spread the papers on the small kitchen table. Deeds, contracts, bank statements, everything organized and labeled. "I never signed over the title," Thomas said quietly. "The house is still mine." George whistled low. "Well, that changes everything." Thomas felt a flicker of hope ignite inside him for the first time in weeks. The following morning, Thomas made his way to the town's legal office, clutching the folder of documents tightly. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew he needed help. His steps echoed lightly in the sterile hallway as he approached the reception desk. "Mr. Thomas Reed? Attorney Anthony Briggs will see you now," the receptionist said with a polite smile. Thomas nodded and entered the office. Anthony Briggs was a sharp-eyed man in his early 30s, known locally for his straightforward approach and dedication to his clients. After exchanging brief greetings, Thomas laid the folder on the desk. "I need your advice," he began. "My son and his wife, they took over my house, but I never legally gave it to them. I want to know what I can do." Anthony carefully examined the documents. "This isn't an uncommon situation," he said thoughtfully. "It looks like your son assumed ownership without a proper deed transfer. Legally, that could be challenged." Thomas felt a spark of hope. "So I can fight this?" Anthony nodded. "Yes, but it will require evidence that you never intended to transfer ownership. These bank statements showing the mortgage was taken without your knowledge are important." Thomas swallowed hard. "How long will this take?" "Legal battles can drag on," Anthony warned. "But we'll prepare a strong case. First, we need to file a formal claim to assert your rights." Thomas straightened. "I'm ready." Anthony smiled, a rare softness in his eyes. "Good. I'll start drafting the paperwork. We'll take it step by step." Walking out of the office, Thomas felt the weight on his shoulders lighten, if only slightly. He had a plan. He wasn't defeated. His thoughts turned to Derek and Melanie, the family that had shut him out. But now, he held a secret weapon, the truth. Thomas looked up at the clear sky and whispered to himself, "This isn't over." In the days that followed, Thomas kept a low profile. He stayed mostly at George's trailer, spending his mornings reviewing old notebooks and the mountain of papers he had collected. Nights were spent under a threadbare blanket, the hum of distant traffic his only companion. His lawyer, Anthony, had filed the initial paperwork to reclaim his rights to the house. But the waiting game had begun, courts were slow, and the reality of a legal battle loomed heavy. Thomas wasn't deterred. He saw this time as an opportunity to rebuild himself, to regain the respect he once held, and to remind his family that he was not to be dismissed so easily. One evening, George sat beside him with a bottle of whiskey and a serious look. "You're going to have to be smart about this," George said, pouring a glass. "Not just the law, but how you handle Derek and Melanie." Thomas nodded. "I want them to understand what respect means." George clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. Because sometimes justice isn't just in the courtroom." That night, Thomas began drafting a letter. Not one of anger or blame, but one that carried the weight of his dignity and the truth of his struggle. He wrote, "To Derek and Melanie, you once called me, old man, and told me to go away. I left, but I never left behind the life I built, or the truth about our home. I am fighting to reclaim what is rightfully mine. Not for spite, but for respect. I hope someday you'll see me as more than a burden." Thomas folded the letter neatly and set it aside. His journey for justice was just beginning, but so was his journey for peace. Weeks passed, and the court date finally arrived. Thomas sat quietly in the courtroom, the old leather notebook resting on his lap. He wore his best suit, a little worn but carefully pressed, and a look of calm determination. Opposite him sat Derek and Melanie, both appearing uncomfortable. Their faces showed frustration, but also a flicker of uncertainty. It was clear this fight was not just about property but pride. The judge listened carefully as Thomas's lawyer, Anthony Briggs, laid out the facts. Documents were presented showing the lack of any official transfer of ownership, the mortgage taken without Thomas's consent, and the emotional toll on the elderly man. Derek's attorney argued that the family had acted in good faith, that Thomas had willingly handed over control by selling his house, and that the stability of the family depended on maintaining the current arrangement. But Thomas's quiet strength and clear evidence resonated with the judge. After what felt like hours, the judge ruled in Thomas's favor, at least temporarily. granting an injunction that prevented Derek and Melanie from selling or mortgaging the property while the case was ongoing. It was the first victory, small but significant. Outside the courthouse, Thomas breathed deeply, the tension easing from his shoulders. George was waiting with a proud grin. "You did good, Tommy," George said. "This is just the beginning." Thomas nodded, the taste of justice bittersweet but real. He was ready for whatever came next. After the court victory, a fragile calm settled over Thomas's life. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered like a storm waiting to break. Derek's attitude grew colder, his words sharper. Calls and messages became scarce, replaced by curt emails from Melanie's lawyer demanding quick resolution and threatening countersuits. One afternoon, Thomas received a letter, a final attempt at negotiation, with an offer to buy his claim at a fraction of the property's value. He read the letter carefully, then tore it in half. No more compromises. Determined not to be pushed aside, Thomas started documenting everything. Every conversation, every interaction, every attempt to belittle or exclude him. Meanwhile, the local community began to notice. Neighbors whispered, some expressed sympathy, others judgment. But Thomas found solace in small acts. The nods from old friends, the warmth of George's company, the simple pleasure of quiet mornings with his notebook. Despite the legal battle, Thomas focused on rebuilding himself. He enrolled in a local workshop on basic computer skills, something to keep his mind sharp. He volunteered at the community center, helping repair broken appliances and mentoring teenagers interested in trades. Life was hard, but his spirit was stronger. One evening, as he sat on the porch of George's trailer, he stared at the stars and thought about the family that had turned their backs on him. He knew the path ahead was long and uncertain, but Thomas Reed was no longer the man who left his home broken and defeated. He was ready to fight, and ready to win. One rainy afternoon, as Thomas was leaving the community center, a woman approached him. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a warm smile. "Mr. Reed? I'm Karen Willis. I live down the street from Derek and Melanie." Thomas blinked in surprise. "Hello, Karen. How can I help you?" Karen hesitated a moment before continuing. "I've been watching what's been happening. It's not right. I grew up in this town. I remember your family when you were happy." Thomas studied her face, unsure. "I want to help," she said simply. "Not just for you, but for the kids. They deserve better than what's going on." Over the next few weeks, Karen became an unexpected ally. She shared information, discreetly gathered evidence of Derek's questionable financial decisions, and even offered to testify if needed. Her support lifted Thomas's spirits and strengthened his case. One evening, as they sat sipping coffee in George's trailer, Thomas said, "I never expected kindness from my son's neighbors." Karen smiled. "Sometimes, the people closest to us surprise us the most." With Karen's help, Thomas began uncovering deeper issues behind Derek and Melanie's actions. There were unpaid debts, questionable loans, and hints of financial trouble they'd kept hidden from the family. One evening, Karen handed Thomas a folder filled with photocopies of bank statements and court documents. "Derek's been juggling debts for years," she explained. "Melanie's family isn't as wealthy as they pretended. They were counting on your house as a safety net." Thomas felt a cold wave wash over him. His generosity had been exploited. He knew now that this wasn't just about disrespect or family drama. It was about survival, theirs and his. Yet, despite everything, Thomas resolved to keep his dignity intact. He began drafting letters, not just legal ones, but personal messages to Derek and the grandchildren, hoping to reach a part of them still worth saving. Family isn't just about blood or property. It's about respect, love, and honesty. I hope someday we find our way back to that. Thomas spent a long night crafting the letter. He chose his words carefully. No bitterness, no accusations, only honesty and hope. "Dear Derek, Bella, and Jake, I know things have been difficult. I'm not the man I used to be, but I am still your father and grandfather. I don't want money or property. I want respect and family. I hope you remember the good times and know I still love you all, despite everything. Please think about what truly matters. With love, Dad. He sent the letter by certified mail and waited. Days felt like weeks. Then, one afternoon, Thomas received an unexpected call. It was Bella, his granddaughter. Grandpa. Her voice was hesitant. Mom and Dad made me say not to call, but I miss you. Thomas's heart clenched. I miss you too, sweetheart. Their conversation was brief, but filled with a warmth Thomas hadn't felt in months. It was a small crack in the wall between them, but it was there. The phone call from Bella was like a fragile thread pulling Thomas back from the edge of loneliness. Her small voice, hesitant but genuine, reminded him of the warmth he once took for granted, the sound of family, the laughter of grandchildren, the ties that bind even when strained. After that call, Thomas found himself writing letters more often, not just to Bella but to Jake as well. He sent books and small gifts, a worn copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer for Jake, a soft knitted scarf for Bella, handmade by his late wife's sister. He didn't expect much in return, but the act itself brought a quiet comfort. At first, the replies were sparse, a thank you note here, a quick phone call there, but they were signs of life in a relationship that had grown cold. Derek remained distant and guarded, his anger still simmering beneath the surface, but Thomas was patient. He knew healing would take time. One chilly Saturday afternoon, George's trailer door creaked open to reveal two small faces peeking in. Bella and Jake, shy and uncertain, stepped inside. George greeted them with his usual booming voice and warm grin, instantly breaking the tension. Thomas watched from his worn armchair as the children settled in, their laughter echoing through the cramped space. They played old card games, shared stories, and for a few precious hours, the weight of the past seemed to lift. After they left, Thomas sat quietly, a mixture of hope and apprehension swirling inside him. He knew the wounds wouldn't heal overnight. The betrayal, the harsh words, the years of distance, these were scars that needed tending with care. But he was ready to try. In the weeks that followed, Thomas continued his quiet efforts, visits to the community center, slow rebuilding of trust, and a steady focus on what really mattered. His lawyer's case moved forward, but Thomas's true victory was in these small moments of connection, the phone calls, the letters, the unexpected visits. One evening, as he sat on the porch of George's trailer watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Thomas wrote in his notebook, "Family is not perfect. It is messy, complicated, and sometimes painful. But it is worth fighting for love, for respect, for hope." The journey toward reconciliation was far from over, but Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet strength, born not from anger or revenge, but from the simple power of forgiveness. The courthouse corridors felt colder than ever as Thomas stepped out from another long, draining hearing. The slow march of justice was wearing on him, but he held on to hope. After all, patience was the weapon of the weary. As he walked down the steps, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his heart skip. "Derek. Dad, can we meet?" I think we need to talk," came the hesitant voice. Thomas paused, the memories of harsh words flooding back. But something genuine lingered in Derek's tone, something unfamiliar. "All right. Where?" Thomas replied, steady despite the swirl of emotions. "Let's meet at the park, the one by Maple Street. Just talk. No arguments." The park was quiet in the golden afternoon light, leaves crunching underfoot. Thomas arrived early, sitting on a weathered bench, fingers nervously tracing the wood grain. When Derek approached, there was no anger in his eyes, only exhaustion and something resembling regret. They sat in silence at first, sharing the weight of unsaid words. Finally, Derek broke the quiet. "I was wrong, Dad. I let anger and pride get the better of me. I treated you like a stranger when you're my father." Thomas's throat tightened. It hurt. "But I'm glad you said it." Derek nodded, eyes moist. "I'm sorry for everything. For pushing you away, for the harsh words, for forgetting what family really means." Thomas reached out, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Thank you. That means everything. The conversation stretched on, honest and raw. They spoke of mistakes, lost time, hopes for the future. Though forgiveness was not immediate nor perfect, the fragile bridge between them had begun to form. As the sun set, casting warm light on the path ahead, Thomas felt a flicker of peace he hadn't known in months. The road to healing was long, but it was finally underway. The weeks after their park meeting were a slow but steady thaw. Derek and Thomas began to rebuild a fragile connection, one conversation at a time. Calls became more frequent, visits less tense. The grandchildren's smiles returned to Thomas's life, lighting corners long darkened by pain. The court case, while still ongoing, no longer defined Thomas's days. Instead, he focused on the small moments: Bella's excited retelling of school stories, Jake showing him how to play basketball, the shared meals at George's trailer filled with laughter instead of silence. One sunny afternoon, Thomas stood in front of the old house, now officially his again thanks to the court's ruling. The front yard was overgrown, the paint peeling, but to Thomas, it was a symbol, not just of property reclaimed, but of dignity restored. He turned as Derek approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee, a tentative smile on his face. "Welcome home, Dad," Derek said softly. Thomas felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thank you, son. It feels good to be back." Inside, the walls echoed with familiar creaks and memories. Together, they began the work of repairing more than just the house, mending the broken ties and rebuilding trust. Thomas understood now that true revenge wasn't about punishment. It was about standing tall in the face of betrayal, choosing forgiveness over bitterness, and reclaiming one's place with grace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, father and son sat side by side on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. The past had left its scars, but the future was theirs to write. Thank you for following Henry's story. If you enjoyed this heartfelt journey of family, resilience, and justice, please like, share, and subscribe for more soul-stirring tales. Explore our other stories here on When Karma Strikes, where every betrayal meets its reckoning, and every silence holds a secret strength.